might start talking because I know the first slide pretty well. So I think you will all be well aware that the Voluntary Assisted Dying Act passed the WA Parliament on the 10th of December 2019 and commenced in full on the 1st of July. And in that 18-month period, we worked to establish all of the services and processes that were needed to ensure that this was implemented safely and appropriately in WA. So that included the establishment of the Voluntary Assisted Dying Board, the establishment of the statewide Care Navigator service, the establishment of the statewide pharmacy service, the development of mandatory training for practitioners, and the development of clinical guidelines for practitioners to really enable them to work in a way that is consistent with the Act. We've also developed, and I hope that many of you have already seen them, a wide range of information sheets for health practitioners and for members of the public, which are available on our website. And we will have a link to that website on the slides. So that was an 18 months, I think, very usefully used to make sure that we had everything ready for the commencement of voluntary assisted dying. There we are. We've done that one. And the only thing I forgot on that slide was that during that 18-month period, we were very fortunate to work with the implementation leadership team led by Dr. Scott Blackwell in his previous role, who provided us with much appreciated expert advice throughout that process. I suspect that this slide or this information is probably pretty well known to all of you, but I always make sure that we include it in our presentations because I think a lot of the questions that people have around voluntary assisted dying and how it's working come back to patient eligibility and who is eligible for this. So in order to be eligible, somebody needs to be aged 18 years and over. They need to be an Australian citizen or permanent resident and to have been ordinarily resident in WA for at least 12 months. And perhaps that's the only thing that we can thank the global pandemic for is that it's pretty clear at the moment who's ordinarily resident in WA and who isn't. The person needs to be diagnosed with at least one disease, illness or medical condition that is advanced, progressive and will cause death, and which will, on the balance of probabilities, cause death within a period of 6 months, or 12 months if the person has a neurodegenerative condition, and is causing suffering that cannot be relieved in a manner that the person considers tolerable. The person needs to have decision-making capacity in relation to voluntary assisted dying, and they need to retain that decision-making capacity right throughout the process. Even if somebody is found eligible for voluntary assisted dying, if they then lose decision-making capacity, then they are no longer eligible. They need to be acting voluntarily and without coercion, and they need to make an enduring request for access to voluntary assisted dying. And when we step through the process for this in a moment, you'll see how that enduring request is demonstrated. I just wanted to touch briefly on discussing VAD and raising the topic before we get on to the formal process. Any person can raise the topic of voluntary assisted dying with anybody involved in their care, and anyone can respond to questions or provide information about voluntary assisted dying to a patient. However, healthcare workers must not initiate a conversation or suggest voluntary assisted dying to a patient. And this is different to how it works in Victoria. So if you're thinking that it sounds a bit different, they have some different prohibitions around how this works. However, a medical practitioner or a nurse practitioner can initiate a discussion, including voluntary assisted dying, if at the same time they discuss with the patient their palliative care and treatment options and the likely outcome of that care and treatment. And Clare will talk a bit more in a moment about the links between voluntary assisted dying and palliative care. But really the intention of this is that discussion around voluntary assisted dying should be part of a wider discussion around end-of-life care and people's priorities. In terms of eligibility for practitioners, so which practitioners can take part in this, a practitioner must meet the requirements that are outlined on the slide here. They must hold specialist medical registration for at least 1 year, or hold general medical registration for at least 10 years, or be an overseas trained medical specialist who holds limited registration or provisional registration, or be a registered nurse practitioner for at least 2 years. For all of those requirements, they must also meet the requirements approved by, we call him the CEO in the Act. In real life, he's called the Director General of Health. So those CEO requirements are really around the recency of practice and the hours of practice that somebody has, and that they don't have current notifications on their APRA or health practitioner registration record, and that they've provided 2 professional referees. And those requirements are there to follow through on the commitments that were made in Parliament about the type of practitioners who will be involved in this process. So there are 3 types of practitioners outlined in the Act. The first is the coordinating practitioner, who must be an eligible medical practitioner, must complete the training. Their role is to accept the first request and conduct the first assessment. And if the person's found eligible, then the coordinating practitioner, as you can tell by the title, really coordinates that process for the person. The consulting practitioner has the same eligibility requirements as a coordinating practitioner, and provides a second consulting assessment, which is an independent second assessment of the person's eligibility. And the role of administering practitioner can be held by a medical practitioner or by a nurse practitioner, and this is where in WA we're quite unusual in terms of having a role for a nurse practitioner. Most of the other requirements are the same. The role of administering practitioner can be undertaken by the coordinating practitioner, but sometimes you'll need a separate practitioner, and that's why this role has been created. All of which is a bit of an introduction to the VAD process overview so that we know who we're talking about. It does feel a bit like introducing a cast of characters in a play or something like that. So this is a very brief walk through the overall process for voluntary assisted dying and how this is outlined in the Act. And as I said before, the speakers who will talk next will talk in a bit more detail about the other elements of this. So the first formal step in a voluntary assisted dying process is the making of a first request. And a first request must be made formally as part of a medical consultation to a medical practitioner. If that first request is accepted by that medical practitioner, then they become the coordinating practitioner and conduct the first assessment for that person. And that assessment is about determining whether this person is eligible, whether they meet the criteria that we talked about a moment ago in terms of the diagnosis that they have, the decision-making capacity, whether they're resident in WA, etc. The person then proceeds to a consulting assessment, which is conducted by the consulting practitioner and is an independent assessment of that person's eligibility. If the person is found eligible at both of those stages, then they proceed to write a declaration of their intent to access voluntary assisted dying, which needs to be witnessed by 2 independent witnesses. I won't go into a lot of detail about all of the requirements, happy to answer questions about it later. And that written declaration is an example of that enduring request, so that written declaration is made. And then the person needs to also make a final request for voluntary assisted dying. Once that has happened, then the coordinating practitioner does a final review to check that all of the steps have been correctly and appropriately followed to that point. The coordinating practitioner and the patient will have a discussion about the administration of the substance for that person, and whether the person is self-administering the substance, or if they are not able or willing to do so, whether practitioner administration might be more appropriate for that person. That administration decision is a decision between the person and their coordinating practitioner. It needs to be a discussion between them to reach that decision. Once that decision has been made, then the coordinating practitioner will write the prescription and work with the statewide pharmacy service to supply the voluntary assisted dying substance, usually to the person if it's self-administration, or to the practitioner if the decision has been made for practitioner administration. Once the person has died, and people can choose where they take the substance, particularly if it's self-administration, so people can choose to take it at home. They may also request that they're admitted to hospital, and obviously there's processes for the hospital that need to be worked through there, but people do have some choice about where they take the substance. Then in terms of death certification, the death certificate is completed and it refers to the underlying condition which the person has. it doesn't list voluntary assisted dying as a cause of death, and that's one of the things that's stipulated in the Act. So that's a very high-level walkthrough of the process, but I hope gives you a picture about how all of the parts work together. So we are at pretty early days in terms of implementation at the 18th of August, just over 6 weeks since this has been a choice available to West Australians at the end of life. And I think we would all say that we are all learning about how this is working. And for the vast majority of the time, I think it is working pretty well. Of course, there are things that will take a bit of time or which might need a little bit of improvement, and they're the sorts of things that we're all working together to understand. Some of the areas already that we know need a bit more focus or a bit more work include supporting the primary health sector, particularly general practitioners. I'm really aware at the moment general practitioners have a lot on their plates as they're managing COVID vaccinations, a lot of demand on the health system, and now requests for voluntary assisted dying as well. So we're keen to provide some more information to GPs to help them to make the decision around whether they want to be a practitioner as part of this. And that's particularly true in rural and remote areas. We are looking at the practitioner access to the approved training to just make sure that the process we have in place is working as well as it possibly can for practitioners and isn't delaying people's access to that training. We always knew that developing a culturally safe approach for Aboriginal people would be something that would take a little bit longer than the 18 months, and we've been working with the Aboriginal Health Council of WA and our colleagues in Aboriginal Health Policy in the department around that, and that's a piece of work that will continue. And the Act is scheduled to be reviewed 2 years after implementation, so that will be July 2023. And so we will start to work towards that review of the Act and any changes that might be required to the Act in that time. Steve, how am I going for time?
Yeah, you're okay.
Okay, all right. No, not okay?
Okay, all
Okay, all right. I'll give a quick update around advanced health directives. So I know that my colleague, Dr. Simon Taylor, who's our end-of-life care clinical lead, gave a presentation to you last year, I think.
Yes.
Around advanced health directives, and I'm really pleased to provide a bit of an update around the work that has happened since that time. So I think at that time, Simon would have talked to you around the advanced health directive template, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, and perhaps aware that the current version is not particularly user-friendly. And so we have been working to revise that template. We had extensive consultation last year to make the recommendations around what this should look like going forward, and it's now with Department of Justice for their approval and updating of the regulations. So the Advanced Health Directive template is actually part of the regulations for the Guardianship and Administration Act, which is owned, if you like, by Department of Justice. So Health has done the work around consulting on the template, but the final decision for how this looks and works sits with the Department of Justice, and the template has to be consistent with the Guardianship and Administration Act. I was commenting to a colleague yesterday who worked on this revision that possibly drafting voluntary assisted dying legislation was more straightforward than revising the Advanced Health Directive template. There are so many stakeholders with different needs who need to have that template work for them. It was quite a challenge, but we're pleased with the version that we have, and we wait on the outcome from Department of Justice. We've also started more education and awareness strategies for community and health professionals around advanced care planning, and are working through options for designing and developing the Advanced Health Directive Register. That is dependent on some budget outcomes, which we're waiting on at the moment. We have initiated investigation into inclusion of MBS billing, which is Medicare Benefit Schedule billing for Advanced Health Directive preparation by GPs. This is something that would really help GPs to take the time to help people with their advanced health directives. And people who present to WA hospitals with an advanced health directive are now flagged on the hospital's patient admission system. Just quickly looking at the revised Advanced Health Directive template, in terms of the impact for consumers, from the version that is currently sitting with Department of Justice, we believe that we'll see greater ease of completion because it now includes a section for people to outline their values and preferences, some tick boxes for people around the kinds of options that they might want or not want, and a comprehensive list of life-sustaining treatments, again, that people can indicate whether they might want those or not want those. For clinicians, it's now a more comprehensive form because it includes the maker's values and preferences, which really helps clinicians to make a decision based on much more relevant information. There's now a section that includes medical research, and there's an ability to revoke your Advanced Health Directive, which makes clinicians more confident that the version they're looking at is the correct and current version. And we're currently developing information that will go with that new Advanced Health Directive to meet community and consumer needs, and really wanting to make that a document that will work well for the community and for consumers. That's the link to the voluntary assisted dying resources that I mentioned at the beginning. Our email there for the voluntary assisted dying team, please, if you have questions that you don't have a chance to ask today, please feel free to email us at that address. And I've also just included the link for advanced care planning, which I've just realised that format isn't going to work terribly well, but I'm happy to provide another version of that link to you. Thank you.
Thanks for that very warm welcome, Steve, and thank you all so much for letting me come and have a chat with you today. Just make technology behave, and then we'll be off and racing. Fabulous. So I had a great fear before the 1st of July that people wouldn't know that the Care Navigator service was here, and people would be sitting at home wondering what to do. Happily, my fears have not been realised in many cases because we've been quite busy since the 1st of July. But I'm keen just to let you know a little bit about what our service does. Can you hear okay down the back? Yep. What our service does. So we have been established as a single point of contact for anyone in WA who has any questions or need any supports in relation to voluntary assisted dying. So that certainly can be people seeking advice and support in relation to themselves, supporting their decision-making process and needing help and support throughout the VAD process. Or it might be your GP who's got questions, who you might have made a first request to, that they're not sure what to do with it, your admitting team in hospital, the nurse that comes to see you in your home. A whole host of people can contact our service for healthcare and support. We are able to provide both general and specific information, so we've certainly had varied questions throughout the last 6 weeks. So that may just be, I heard on the news that voluntary assisted dying is available, can you give me a bit of information about who's eligible? Or it may be someone who's carefully done the research already and really wants our help to link them with a practitioner and needs our support throughout their journey. So very varied depending on what it is that people ask of us. And our service is certainly able to be flexible and adaptable depending on what people need from us. We are also able to assist you to locate practitioners who have completed the training or are willing and eligible to assist you, and we'll come back to that a little bit later because I know that's usually something people are very keen to hear about. We do also have a role to play in terms of linking people and their families and support networks in with other healthcare services, and certainly we've played a role with linking a number of people who have contacted us with palliative care services and different support networks in their local community to make sure people are getting holistic care and good options as part of their end-of-life choices. We do also have the capacity to manage the Regional Access Support Scheme, which is a very special fund the government has kindly set up to help us support equity and access across WA, which I think some of you are also keen to hear about, so we will come back to that in a little moment. So I am very privileged to lead the team of Care Navigators, and they are a diverse bunch. So we have 2 full-time equivalent, which is essentially 2 full-time positions, but 3 actual humans, a physio, a social worker and a nurse. Not by any particular design. Those people were just the right people for the role, and they certainly have a vast degree of experience in this space and in palliative care and in oncology work and in legislation, all of those things that they're able to bring to the table to help us provide care for people who contact us. So in terms of our service delivery, we are reactive to requests for care, so we won't ever canvass for people to contact us. We just want to make people aware that we are able, should anyone wish to contact us for help, care and support, they are welcome to do so. We do work very closely with a number of service providers, and certainly I spent a lot of time prior to implementation with different hospitals and health services to help them think about their position and help them work through how our service might work closely with them, what kind of care we could provide for people who were perhaps admitted to their services, and to help work with them around what their policy looks like. We also work very closely with the statewide pharmacy service and with the VAD board and the department and the end-of-life care team. We do link in quite closely with GPs and a patients treating team, and again, we'll come back to that in a moment because that's usually quite an important part of ensuring people get cohesive and coordinated, well-supported care. We will provide care to people however it is that they require it, essentially. So we do provide face-to-face visits where that's appropriate because a person wants to see us face-to-face or maybe does have difficulty communicating over the phone or via video conference, and we can do that in a person's home, in a hospital setting, or in the community, depending on what's appropriate for the person. We do also provide care via video conference, telephone and email, although there are some restrictions about the conversations that we can have via those means, and the team will certainly talk you through that if that's appropriate for you at the time. So in terms of the Regional Access Support Scheme, so that has been funded to allow us to support equitable access to people across WA to a practitioner where that's appropriate. And if there is no doctor available in your local area, you can contact the statewide Care Navigator service for assistance to travel to a practitioner who is able and willing to support you in relation to voluntary assisted dying. You can potentially bring a support person with you, or the RAS can pay for a practitioner to travel to you when that's more appropriate and we have a practitioner available to do that. Interpreters can also travel both ways. In terms of access to the RAS, it is very much assessed on a case-by-case basis, and we do need to know about it before the travel happens, but we will work through the assessment of eligibility with you, and we're very happy to talk that through with anyone as and when that's required, and you can certainly appeal the decision if you're not happy with the outcome. So there are a lot of things that a person can do for themselves in relation to voluntary assisted dying. So certainly our service is available to help and support you with anything that you need, but as voluntary assisted dying is very much a person-centred choice and one of the most person-centred healthcare I've ever had the privilege to be involved in, there are a number of things that you can do for yourself if this is something that you are considering exploring or you're caring for someone who is. So the first thing our service will always suggest you do is have a conversation with your GP or your treating team if you're comfortable to do that. They will be able to provide better care for you if they understand that this is part of a journey that you're on. They may not be able to support it in terms of they may not be eligible to do the training, they may not be able to do the training, or they may work for an organisation who doesn't facilitate that. All of those things are okay, but they can still provide you with really excellent care, and they may help you to sort of tailor the care that they are providing to you based around what you want for you. So a really important conversation to have if you feel comfortable doing it. If you don't and you've contacted the Care Navigator service, we will often offer to do that on your behalf if you want your GP to know, but you just don't want to have that conversation with them. We would also really encourage anyone who contacts us to consider the eligibility criteria, and we can certainly talk that through with you, particularly in relation to citizenship or permanent residency and being ordinarily a resident in WA. As Amanda mentioned, we have a lot less travelling happening at the moment, so it does make that one a little bit easier. But it may mean that people need to do things like seek access to birth certificates, expired birth certificates, they don't expire as far as I know, expired passports, driver's licences, those things are all still okay so long as they show that you're you, but certainly having access to those things and being able to provide them to the doctors who are providing care for you is really helpful. And sometimes a birth certificate takes a little while to rustle out of the filing cabinet or to request if you need to request one from death and marriages. So something just to think about if this is something that you're considering or you're aware that someone that you're caring for is. Prognostication is also really important, and Amanda touched on in the eligibility criteria that someone must be in the last 6 months of their life for most conditions, or 12 months if you have a neurodegenerative condition. And that's often something that your doctor will need support from your specialist to help them determine when they're going through their eligibility assessment. So having a conversation with those doctors ahead of time is always a really good idea, just to settle in yourself where you're at in terms of your condition and likely prognosis, and being able to share that information with the doctor who's caring for you is incredibly helpful to them in terms of working smoothly through the assessment process. We would also really encourage people to consider the supporting roles that are required, and Amanda did touch on a couple of them in terms of witnessing. So there is a written declaration that a person is required to do, which is the second of the 3 requests the person must make for access to voluntary assisted dying, and that declaration must be witnessed by someone who is not your coordinating doctor, not your consulting doctor, not a family member, must be over the age of 18 and can't be a beneficiary of your will. So for many people, that's probably just about every single human they've had a conversation with about voluntary assisted dying, right? So we would encourage people to think really early on, if this is a process that you are thinking you might want to explore, consider who you might ask to be a witness. That could be a next door neighbour, it could be a teacher from the school, it could be a family friend. There are lots of people that you may be able to contact, and if you don't have someone who can support you, we can certainly help link you with someone if that's appropriate. The contact person is also something that's really key under our legislation. So for a person in WA who's intending to self-administer the substance, before the prescription can be written and the substance dispensed to them, they must nominate a contact person. And a contact person is required by law to ensure the return of any unused substance within 14 days after a person's death. And they also have a role to play in terms of notifying the coordinating practitioner that the person has died. That role is very particular and is often filled by family members or friends. But again, it's very, very important that you have a bit of a think about that early on. If this is something that you are thinking about doing, consider who you might ask to fill that role, because you need to ask them, they need to accept, and that must happen before the prescription can be written. Okay? So doctors, and nurse practitioners. So we would, as I mentioned, always encourage you to share your wishes with your GP and treating team, because it will help them to provide better care for you based on what you want. And we've certainly seen in a number of cases, even if that doctor is not able to provide care in relation to voluntary assisted dying, it changes the nature of the conversation they have with you to help support your wishes and what you want for you at the end of your life. We can certainly help if that's a conversation that you just don't feel comfortable having and you need our help to do so. We can assist in linking you with a practitioner if your normal treating team are not able to do that for you. We do have numbers that are slowly increasing across the state. I'm very encouraged whenever we see a report on that to see that they are growing. I would never discourage anyone from talking about voluntary assisted dying with their doctor, even if you don't think that they will be able to fill a role, and certainly wouldn't discourage you from talking to the Care Navigator service if that's something that you need, because we haven't been unable to link anyone with a doctor to my knowledge so far. Okay, so please, wherever you live, please contact us if you need help and support in that space. The Regional Access Support Scheme is also there to help facilitate access if you do need to travel or a practitioner does need to travel to you if there's no one available in your local area. When the doctors do the training, when they finish, the first time they log on to our online platform or the Voluntary Assisted Dying Information Management System, they are asked if they would like to share their contact details with the Statewide Care Navigator service, and a lot of the doctors have done that, so that's the most special treasure I own. I feel a little bit like Lord of the Rings about it. They are very, very, very precious to us. And we have had a number of questions where people have asked us for lists of doctors or specific doctor names. We will never provide that direct to you, and that's really important in terms of preserving the doctor's right to privacy and confidentiality and making sure that they have the time and space to carefully consider a request for someone needing their help and support. So if you do contact us and you ask for our help to speak to a doctor, my first port of call would be to go to our register once we've had a conversation to determine that is what you want and you're ready for that, to have a look at our register, see what practitioners we have available who may be the best fit for you, because there are some doctors with particular specialties or expertise or see patients in particular areas, are or aren't willing to travel. There's a whole lot of things for us to think about. And I would contact them with your permission and ask to share your contact details or your clinical information with that doctor. They would consider that referral, and if they were willing and able to accept it, I would then ask them how they wanted to be put in contact with you, and they may call you themselves, or they may ask me to share your details with them so that you can contact them to make an appointment or see them wherever it is that they're able to provide care. So please be patient with us as part of that process, but it is really important to make sure that the practitioners do have time and space to consider your request before we send you along to them. So we are a Monday to Friday, 8:30 till 5 service. We don't work public holidays and we're not there on the weekend. And that's to reflect that voluntary assisted dying is a planned, careful and intentional process. And I'm sure if you didn't already know this before, when you heard Amanda talk through the steps of the process, it's not something that happens quickly. It's not something after a bad day on a Sunday I can have by Sunday afternoon, okay? This is something that will take time. We do encourage people, if it is something that you're interested in exploring, start having those conversations early. Please don't wait for Sunday afternoon because we may not be able to support your need for care. We do have an office-based landline. If you ring, you'll talk to our admin assistant and she will let you know that we will aim to return your call within 2 working days. Often we're able to contact you sooner than that, but it does depend on what's happening and certainly our experience in the period of high demand at the moment, but we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. You can also email us. And our email address is up there, and both of those contact details are very freely available on the internet for anyone who needs our care and support. Anyone can contact us. Family members often will call on behalf of someone else and seek some information, advice and support, or a person can contact us or their GP can. Anyone is welcome to give us a shout. And that's it from me.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm very pleased to be here talking today. All right, so as you've heard, I'm the clinical lead for the implementation of voluntary assisted dying at East Metro Health Service. With my palliative care household, I will talk to you about palliative care and voluntary assisted dying. And then just briefly at the end, hopefully you'll indulge me a little bit of conversation about how East Metro has actually taken the piece of voluntary assisted dying legislation, all 179 pages of it, and actually spent 6 months turning that into a service that now patients are able to access. Apologies to those of you who were at the conference. It's a bit of a combination of what was there, but I think it's important to understand how to take, that legislation and actually turn it into something people can have. So just to give you a brief overview, I'll talk to you a little bit about what palliative care is and also what it isn't. Some of the current end-of-life options that exist in the world of palliative care, and then try and put voluntary assisted dying in a palliative care context. It's a really big topic and it's quite polarising, and I suspect that there'll probably be a lot of questions because I can only really go into it in a small amount of detail, but I think we'll be able to answer a lot of people's questions in the Q&A after the break. And then, as I said, just a little bit about implementation. So as you're all probably aware, Dame Cicely Saunders is widely credited as being the founder of modern palliative care services, and she opened the first modern hospice in the UK in 1967. Palliative care is a very new specialty in terms of medicine. It really emerged here in WA, sort of pioneered by Dr. Doug Bridge just up the road at Royal Perth Hospital in the early 80s, and was formally recognised by the World Health Organisation as a specialty in 1990. In 1993, the Australia and New Zealand Society for Palliative Medicine was formed, and a year later, the Royal Australasian College of Physicians began their formal training programme. So really just a very, very early but very, very necessary specialty. What is it? Well, it's person and family-centred care, and it mainly focuses on people who have progressive advanced disease from which they are expected to die, although there's no time frame attached to that death. The goal of palliative care is actually the opposite of death. The goal is to optimise life and to optimise a patient's quality of life. Palliative care does, of course, include end-of-life care and terminal care, and sometimes even my doctor colleagues are very misguided in thinking that that's all palliative care has to offer. Clearly, at this time of life, care needs are much higher for patients, but also for their families as well. But ideally, we would like people to be involved with palliative care a lot earlier than that. It's ideal that this isn't the first involvement. Now, excuse how busy the slide is, I will just read it out in full, so no need to worry. But the World Health Organisation have defined palliative care as an approach that improves the quality of life of patients and their families who are facing the problems associated with life-limiting illness through the prevention and relief of suffering by means of early identification, impeccable assessment and treatment of pain and other problems, physical, psychosocial and spiritual. So really, really very big and lots of different things for different people. So how does palliative care achieve that? Well, physical symptoms such as pain, shortness of breath, nausea, incontinence and to a certain extent lethargy are very common in people with life-limiting illness, and they're conditions that palliative care is really very excellent at helping to manage. Psychological issues such as anxiety, sadness and depression do require a bit more of a multimodal approach, but again, palliative care specialists are very good at dealing with these. Social issues such as loneliness and isolation, family conflict, financial worries and loss of place in society, again, require a multidisciplinary approach, but often palliative care can really help if they're able to intervene. And it's really the more profound existential and spiritual issues that people have as they move towards the end of their life that even palliative care struggles to help people to deal with, because they're intensely personal. Your sense of self, your dignity, your autonomy, fear about the quality of your death, these are things that can be quite challenging. Currently, accepted end-of-life practice within the palliative care spectrum includes the withdrawal of nutrition and or hydration, this is clearly towards the very end of life, and the use of terminal or palliative sedation, which tends to be medications that initially are delivered on an as-needed basis, a PRN dosing schedule, but can include medications that are put inside a syringe pump and delivered over 24 hours. And these help with the often unremitting symptoms that a patient can have really in the last few hours or days of life, and it's only really used in that context. It actually also makes the experience more pleasant for the family, typically, because all of those symptoms are managed, and it is a common technique, but it's a technique that even amongst different palliative care specialists, there's no sort of universally accepted practice. Now, why is this viewed differently to voluntary assisted dying? Well, again, this is a huge area to go into, but it really depends on how you look at it. And palliative care specialists look at the use of terminal and palliative sedation with the withdrawal of hydration and nutrition as just supporting a natural dying process. And that it really comes down to the balance between your opinion of autonomy, beneficence, and non-maleficence. And also in terms of the ethical principle of the doctrine of double effect, that if you are using a medication to alleviate pain and relieve suffering, then it's possible you might use that medication in a high enough dose that it may cause a person to move towards their death perhaps a bit quicker, but that's not the reason that you're using that medication. So it comes down to the intent in the medications that are used. And palliative care really can be summed up in a nutshell by the fundamental principle that it intends neither to hasten nor to postpone a person's death. And this is where the attitude of many palliative care specialists to voluntary assisted dying, if you try and remember this principle, this is where it becomes understandable why so many in the palliative care community actually really struggle with voluntary assisted dying. So much so that many palliative care specialists believe that voluntary assisted dying is actually counter to the philosophy of palliative care. So much so that the Australia and New Zealand Society of Palliative Medicine, the peak body representing palliative care specialists, revised their mission statement on voluntary assisted dying in June of this year, so literally just before the 1st of July. And bullet point number 2 states that they don't support the legalisation of euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide, although they do recognise that ultimately these are matters for the government and the community to decide. And they've gone further to say that even though it's recognised to have been legalised in 4 or 5 different places, and other places are considering it, that they endorse international guidelines reaffirming that these practices are not part of normal palliative care. And other palliative care organisations around the world agree. Palliative Care Australia, the European Society, the Canadian Society, Great Britain and Ireland, and the Asia Pacific Hospice and Palliative Care Network all have released similar position statements saying that they don't support voluntary assisted dying in any of its forms, which came as a bit of a surprise to me as well. And it's really only the American Association of Hospices and Palliative Medicine that take a position of studied neutrality. So, yeah. With all that in mind, what does this mean in practice? Well, most palliative care specialists, and certainly the ones that I work with in the East Metro Hospital Network, are conscientious objectors to palliative care. Many, I will say, have been on a very intense journey over the last 18 months, even longer than that, of coming to a place of measured acceptance. I haven't met anyone who is very, very against voluntary assisted dying, but they're very confronted by it. And so much so that most religiously affiliated palliative care units, and that's more than 50% of the ones in WA, won't allow access to voluntary assisted dying on their sites, and that includes the assessment process. That's not just the administration of the substance. And this is causing a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear. And the fears that palliative care specialists are voicing to me are that they worry it's actually going to erode their profession, that people are not really, people misunderstand palliative care anyway, and this is going to make it worse. They're worried about damaging their collegiate relationships for those palliative care specialists who do support voluntary assisted dying, who are in the minority. They're very, very worried about how voicing that support might go down with their colleagues. And they're also worried that the introduction of voluntary assisted dying will erode doctor-patient trust, that if you know at the end of the day that your palliative care specialists provide services to assist somebody to die, that someone who's against voluntary assisted dying might not want that person looking after them. So it's a huge and very, very complex area. So with all that in mind, I will just very quickly go through these slides because with all that knowledge, I sort of very hesitantly applied for the job of clinical lead at East Metro and was given the role on the 1st of February actually. So not an awful long time to get things up and running, and it feels like both a very, very long time and a very, very short time ago. And when I met the Director of Clinical Services, he literally used the words carte blanche. Off you go. Here's this legislation. We're going to work within the framework of it. We're East Metro going to offer all services related to voluntary assisted dying, including assessment and administration on hospital sites if required. So create a service. And as the weight of that responsibility dawned, and I realised the magnitude of what I'd taken on, I was just sort of flailing around a bit, didn't actually really know what to do, and I literally had to just break it down to first principles and actually what it boils down to, which is that this is a choice. It's a choice. We have to honour that choice, and we need to respect the dignity that's inherent in that choice. And the most important thing was to create a proactive service. That, you know, trying to chase your tail and catch up once the 1st of July rolls around was going to be a bit of a disaster for the patients primarily. So I approached it with all the right adjectives, you know, sensitively and honestly and with respect, and lots of communication, and basically embarked on a very big programme of awareness and education and supportive of everybody to try and essentially develop the right culture. Because I don't know if any of you do or have worked in healthcare, but if you establish a negative culture related to something in healthcare, it takes absolutely ages to rectify it. So first things first, knowledge is power, or in the words of the British SAS, knowledge dispels fear. And so I went on a bit of a extensive literature search and data gathering, and here I'd like to offer an immense debt of gratitude and thanks to all our colleagues in Victoria who are willing to share not just the things that they've done well, but actually the things that they wished they'd done better. And they were really frank and honest and incredibly helpful in helping me to not have to be the first person paving the way. I don't know how any of them did it. Put together a support team, including a clinical advisory group, an executive steering committee and a project officer. And then decided, well, what's going to be fundamental to success? And again, lots of these things guided by Victorian experience. So East Metro, along with all the other HSPs who followed suit, have got a voluntary assisted dying programme manager. They've released a statement on their approach or ethos. So ours is on the East Metro website, so you can see exactly what you can expect as a consumer of healthcare within our catchment population. We all have worked together very collaboratively, and it's wonderful, even though WA is so enormous, that everyone has worked together and literally created the same service. So it doesn't matter where you live, north, east, south, or Kimberley, you will get the same access to VAD. We've all worked hard to maximise professional respect and destigmatise voluntary assisted dying, and we're just all on a continual learning journey, and that picture probably ages me. One of my favourites when I was growing up. Input, Stephanie! So I started with a series of educational videos, and I believe the audio transcripts are actually on your website. They were asked for. So talking through all the different facets of voluntary assisted dying, and in particular video 2 talks a bit more extensively about palliative care. We did a grand round chaired by Dr. Simon Towler, the clinical lead for the End of Life Care Committee. And then we released a staff survey, and on the basis of the survey I created an education plan. And we did basically everything. We literally even did a poster run and stuck them up in the staff toilets because people were saying, I don't know anything, I haven't got any information, how does this all work? E-learning packages, central hub for resource, you name it, we kind of did it. We also focused a lot on staff support, wellbeing and pastoral care were part of my clinical advisory group, and we made sure that everybody felt supported from the start and that we knew what their concerns were from the people who filled in the staff survey. It was pretty well done actually for a health survey. Our East Metro programme manager is on board. She's absolutely fantastic. She supports all our patients and their families through the entire process and also supports staff. And we've actually had some patients across the East Metro access voluntary assisted dying, and she's been incredibly busy and an absolutely invaluable resource. We engaged with our consumers, ran a couple of different workshops, and also with all our participating practitioners to try and develop a culture and support doctors and nurse practitioners willing to engage in voluntary assisted dying services. And we also engaged with our local community and all the people who may be relevant, and have literally met people in big forums, small forums, individually, and continue to look for input. Our referral process, I think with most of the others, we are catchment only. And so East Metro can, unless they do it on their own time, only East Metro patients can be seen on East Metro, and that was to make sure that no hospital in WA became a kind of VAD super centre, which is very, very important. And we also take patients from St John of God Midland who are not supporting the voluntary assisted dying journey in its entirety on site. And our programme manager works very, very closely with Alice and her team, and they're all, nobody's treading on each other's toes, everyone's just doing the vast amount of work that's out there. So my hopes for the future really are that the how is significantly less important than the why, and really that in creating a voluntary assisted dying service, I don't want to create a voluntary assisted dying service with a narrow-minded focus. What this is actually is a golden opportunity to bring death and dying out of the shadows and to enable people to have those difficult conversations and to really focus on what it is that they want at the end of their life, and to prompt those conversations and to have them with the staff caring for them as well, so that we reduce suffering, and not just suffering but iatrogenic suffering, often brought about through treatments that people don't necessarily want, but they don't know how to say, I don't actually want that to happen, and enable a good death, no matter how that looks, whether that's voluntary assisted dying or not, because we're all on the same page and we're all just having those conversations that really matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that introduction and the opportunity to talk to you again today about yet another role in the rollout of voluntary assisted dying in Western Australia. And when you listen to the first three speakers, you have to think, aren't we lucky that we've had people of this quality that have been part of the process. And when we were getting through the implementation process and we were getting into this year, into the early part of this year, we thought, oh my God, we can put all these bits together, but who's going to do it? And hearing, from Alice and Clare in particular, and I know Amanda and I are immensely grateful that this quality of person popped up to do the work that really needed to be done for as much as we could do in the implementation process in terms of bringing intelligence and expertise to it, and with the immense amount of work Amanda's team did within the department to bring it to a point where it could start. We really needed some very good quality people on the ground to make it actually happen. So we thought that as we got to the end of the implementation process that our job would be finished. And I just wanted to tell you a little story which one or two of you have heard me perhaps say before, but there was a linguistic competition in the United Kingdom, and they had a whole panel of people and they ran them through a whole lot of linguistic questions to see who was the best linguist in the world. The last question was the question of, please explain in less than 5 minutes the difference between complete and finished. And a guy from Guyana, a linguistic expert, said, it's simple. If you're a man and you find the right woman, you are complete. If you're a man and you find the wrong woman, however, if the right woman finds that man with the wrong woman, you are completely finished. Voluntary assisted dying will never be complete or finished, and certainly not completely finished. But I just wanted to just say we got to that point. But I did want to actually reflect a little bit about the history of how we got here, and in really for a long time the preference to have the choice of voluntary assisted dying was quite strong in Western Australia, as it was right across our country and probably many parts of the world. And it really was the groundswell of the people that actually, I think, brought to government the need to really address this issue. And I think that's important, and you've all played a part in that. And that groundswell needed the right parliament to be able to do it. And in actual fact, we haven't had a parliament that could do that until the parliament who did it And I know there's been lots of challenges on why aren't they doing this? Why? And the fact is, if you looked at the numbers, it was never there. But it was, and it did. And so we had the parliamentary inquiry, and they recommended voluntary assisted dying, and we had the ministerial expert panel, that was the first tap on the shoulder, and I was asked to be part of that, and I thought, ooh, I really haven't been a massive advocate of voluntary assisted dying. This was the moment where you get the call, and my instant response was, yes, I'll do that. And it was probably one of the best experiences I've had, and in that we then had the most extensive community consultation on a health matter that's happened in Western Australia, and that's really driven where we are today. And I really wanted to reflect back on that, because it was that enabled us to bring to the formulation of the legislation the people's wishes, and the people's wishes to have this choice and how they wanted to have it. So that the legislation that we eventually got in 2019 really was the people's legislation, and there's rarely been a more democratic process in anything. And to think that it was voluntary assisted dying that all this sort of happened for was... So that was fine, that's good, all over. Scotty can go and do what Scotty does, play hockey on the first game. It's just after lunch, so we have to hurry. And then I got the next call, would I be on the implementation leadership team? Oh, and by the way, would you chair it? And I thought, oh, all right. So this was the next tap on the shoulder. So no pressure, 15 months, there's the legislation, that's the date, do it, no pressure. So we got, I think, an extremely good team together. And I suppose the things we reflected on were in fact the will of the people, were in fact the conversation in Parliament, as well as the written word in the legislation, and we took into account all of that in terms of what we put into the actual implementation. And then, as I said, we really needed people to front up, like Clare and Alice, to actually then make this a reality, and that happened on the 1st of July this year. So then I got the next tap on the shoulder, would I be the chairman of the board, which is probably a bit of a step down actually, but nonetheless, we'll make it an important role to actually, and that's what I need to talk to you about today. I suspect we do that. That's good, that worked. So what I really want to do is just really talk about the Act and what the board and what the functions of the board are. And so I think it's important that what the board is really trying to do, I think, from its inception, is to take that feeling that we took right through the MEP, through the implementation, and now into the board, is the feeling that this is the people's choice, and that what we are doing is actually making sure it is, as the people asked us to, make sure it's not obstructed, but make sure it's safe, make sure it's accessible, and so on. And we need to oversee that. So we'll have a look at how that sort of all rolls out in terms of the implementation process. So what do we do in the board? Well, we're learning, like everybody else. This is a new process. So I suppose I should go back to the Act, because it really actually tells us what we're really meant to do. First of all, we are an agent of the Crown, and we have the immunities and privileges of the Crown. I'm not sure what that means, but I feel honoured. But the board firstly has a monitoring operation, and I want you to think of that monitoring operation in two parts, and the two parts essentially are, the first part is actually making sure that the process, all those forms, all those documents, that everything's done correctly and right, so that everybody actually gets to the voluntary assisted dying moment the right way and without risk. The second is for us to monitor, and we'll do this largely through case reviews and so on, how it turned out, what issues arose through the process for each person, and to work out a whole lot of things about each individual's journey after they've taken that choice, so that we can then inform ourselves as a board to do some of the rest of the work that we need to do. And I guess the next part of the work that we need to do is to provide to the Minister or the CEO on our initiative or on theirs, reports and on matters relating to the operation of the Act. And this actually in the Act includes recommendations on improvements, and I think that's a very key part of the role that we have as we look at the process, getting that right, and also the reviews of the cases and finding out the issues. We can then actually find ways that we can say, there are better ways to do this, or this is working, that's not working. And already little things that are popping up that we're able to, within the system, actually make little adjustments to. And that was inevitable. So this is an important part of our role. I think the next part of our role is a referral role, and things might go wrong. I'm happy to say that in most jurisdictions that we look at, there's very few referrals that occur, but we can refer to the Commissioner of Police if something criminal happens. We can refer to the Registrar of Births, Deaths and Marriages if something goes wrong in that sort of process of registration. We can refer to the coroner if we think there's a coronial interest in matters to do with voluntary assisted dying. There are a number of regulations laid down by the CEO of voluntary assisted dying, and if there are breaches of those, then we can refer those to the CEO. And I suppose the point I'm really saying, and there are a lot other aspects, professional obviously, to APRA and so on. But the point I'm making is we are not the judge, jury and executioner. We are merely the monitoring process by which these things may be discovered and then referred to the appropriate places to be dealt with. And essentially that's a large part of what we do and what we're starting to do. Essentially also there will be a lot of information that we glean and that will enable us to do a lot of analysis and research, and a lot of that will then go towards recommendations for improvement, and as was mentioned earlier, the review of the Act in 2023 is going to be an important moment for the board as well, because it will give us the opportunity to say this is what's happening and this is what could happen better. So our accountability is to the Minister, and the Minister does have access to information, but not personal information, only general information, unless the individual people have given permission. In the case of voluntary assisted dying, that could be difficult. The membership of the board is in fact 5 people, and they are who we are. We each have a up to 3-year term, and there are rules and regulations around that. So if somebody leaves, the replacement and so on, and I won't bore you with all that. We have a secretariat. We have a secretariat of 2 people, and I'm happy to say that those 2 people have been with us through the ministerial expert panel days, through the implementation leadership team days, so that I'm still well supported and spoiled, just like you've seen today. And that's very necessary, because that's 50 plus years that Steve mentioned do take me to an age that we won't mention today. Although I did have a couple who appeared on TV on Sunday night, I think it was, on the news, who were having their 70-somethings wedding anniversary, and I thought, and they're actually patients of mine in a nursing home, and it was just lovely to see this dear old couple. She's 100, he's 99, and they've been married for 76 years, and I saw them again this week, and we had a little chuckle. So yeah, I've been around, but the interesting part about that, and I digress completely, because we need to, for this particular story, because that gentleman was my pay clerk at Royal Perth Hospital when I was a junior doctor. And he said, I remember your name. That's all he knew about me, is he wrote my paycheck. I love this guy. And getting back to the board, so we have the secretariat of 2, and we are very much supported by the Department of Health, in particular Amanda's team, and we will obviously look to them for other people of experience and expertise should we need support and help and need for replacements and things as time goes by. The board itself may co-opt assistance if we need it, particularly people with specific expertise, because we are a small board. Victoria have a board of about 13, 14, 15 or something, and we have a small board which is which is probably good. So we also have a very efficient information management system. One thing, Victoria, we're equally grateful to Victoria for all the help that they gave us, and one of the things they said to us, make sure your information management system is way better than ours. And so we twisted a few arms in the health department. We have spent a bit of your money, taxpayers' money, and we do have a very good information management system, which we're ironing out one or two little clunky bits at the moment, but nonetheless it enables us to make the process smooth and will enable us to actually extract the information we need for reports and so on. We are expected to report to the Minister, and this will be tabled in Parliament within 6 months of the end of each financial year, so that will be the second half of next year, so we're not feeling any pressure on that at the moment. So there are other requirements, and I think they're really more operational requirements about, as I said, the process of following each form through. We do have a role in terms of managing the contact person that Alice has talked about, and I think that's really important. And that's all I'm going to say.